Today we're going to continue our series on Python. We'll be looking into how to name data using variables, how to interact with user input, and how to make our programs behave differently based on the values that are passed in. To learn how to use variables, do some control flow, and also interact with user data, we're going to do most of our work today in a Python script. But to start off, we're going to actually open up the Python REPL. We'll do all of this from inside of a Docker container, and we'll just run the various Python commands we need as we need them. So to start this off, we're going to use docker run -rm-it-v. Remember, this creates a volume. So we want to take our current directory and pass that in as user src python. And then we want to set our working directory to usr src python also. We're going to use the Python 3.5 image, and then we're going to run bash. Now we're inside of our container, and we're going to run Python just to get started. Before we begin playing around inside the REPL, let's just take a look at the idea that I have for what we're going to learn today. We're going to write a script that allows the user to input a string, and we're going to tell the user whether or not the string they inputted is a palindrome. If you're unfamiliar, a palindrome is a string or is a word or a phrase that can be read either way, and it says the same thing. So radar, if you read it from right to left, says radar, and if you read it from left to right, the normal way, it also says radar. There are other ways you can do this that have spaces too. So one of the strings we're going to use in our examples is the phrase nurses run. If you take the space out, it's the same letters going in both directions. So we want our program to be able to handle both of those things. So to start off, we're going to need to take in the user input and store that. Then we're going to need to manipulate that input a little bit, do a comparison, and then based on how the comparison comes out, we're going to have to do one or two different things. We're going to either output that the string is a palindrome or that it's not. To get started, though, we need to be able to store data as variables. So up to this point, we've done things like 1 + 1, which does math and returns 2, but we never have access to that 2. There's nothing we can type right now that will give us that 2 other than manually typing 2. And that doesn't work if the input that we're receiving isn't something that we already know. So in our case, the user input won't be a string that we can just predict. So for this, we need variables. And to create a variable in Python, you use some sort of identifier that starts with a lowercase letter, myvar, and then equals. And then for this, we're going to say this is my variable, which is a string. And you'll notice that it doesn't actually output anything here. Where we say 2 up here, it returns 2. When we say myvar, nothing is output. But if we type myvar again and hit enter, you'll see that it does output the string that we set it to up here. And this is how you store data in Python as variables. So the variable just requires the assignment operator here, the equal sign. And we can access it anytime we want to by just saying the name of the variable in our code. So if we say, if we create one that is favorite number, then I can do favorite number times 5, and it'll give me 30. So anytime we type favorite number, it will sub in the value that we set to it originally. You can overwrite variables though. So I can change, 6 isn't that cool anymore. 7 is all the rage now. So I can reset this. And now if I run favorite number times 5 again, we'll get 35. So variables aren't always what you set them to originally because sometime in your code you might have reset it. So that's always something to keep in mind. That's the only part that we're going to look at in the REPL right now. So we're going to exit this, and we're going to keep our bash shell open here, but then we're going to bounce over into the directory we had on our main machine. So in my case, it's this Python variables and control flow directory, which I already have open up in Atom. We're going to create a new file. We're going to call this palindrome.py. We're going to start digging into a little bit, piece by piece, into what we need. So remember, the first step was we needed to take user input and store that so that we could do things with it. And to do that in Python, we're going to assign a variable, and we're going to use the built-in function input, which allows us to specify a string as the prompt. So in this case, I want to tell the user to enter a phrase. And then we'll leave a space here just so it reads a little bit better. And then whenever the user hits enter, we will capture that, store it off as phrase, and then our program will continue. Just to test how this works right now, we're going to say print your phrase was we'll pass in phrase. So we'll save this, and we bounce back over to our terminal, and we run python palindrome.py, enter a phrase. This is my phrase. And you can see that it captured it, and we were able to sub that into this other string and print it out to the screen. So taking user input wasn't that complicated. It just took knowing the right function to call. The next thing we want to do is we want to remove the spaces from it so that we can check to make sure that our example string nurses run actually works out to be a palindrome in both directions. So for that, we're going to save a different variable called sanitized phrase. And this is the first time we're going to see what's known as a method. So functions are, input is a function. It's a piece of code that you can pass something into or not, depending on what the function is. And it's going to do something, and then it may return something, it might not. Well, sometimes if you have an object or a value like a string, so a string is a type of object, you can associate functions to that one instance of an object, and those are called methods. So in this case, phrase, there are some functions that are tied to it that we can call directly to change what phrase looks like, and these are the methods. So we're going to use the replace method, and we want to replace any spaces with an empty string. And what this does, it will actually just take them out. So it'll replace the space with nothing, and that effectively removes all spaces from the string. So we'll say our sanitized phrase is, we'll sub that in here. Save this again. Let's bounce back and do this. Aha, and you'll see that there are no longer any spaces here or here or here. So that gets us pretty far into figuring out if something's a palindrome. The next thing we need to do is we need to reverse the string and compare it to itself. There's not a function to do this, and there's not a method to do this on string exactly. So we're going to have to, I'm going to show you a thing that a string has called slices, but I'm not going to explain it a whole lot right now, just because that's not where we're going for, but I need to show you how you would reverse a string. So to get started, we'll just back this out, and we'll just print out the reversed version of sanitized phrase. So sanitized phrase, and then similar to how we called replace on it, you can do these square brackets here, and this is the subscript operator in some languages. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say colon, -1. And what this means is, so a string is a list of characters, and you can actually get to an individual character in a string by telling it the position in the string. So 0 is the first character, and then the last character would be, it just counts up from there. So if you want the second character in a string, you would say 1. And if you want the third, you would say 2, just because it starts at 0. So whatever position it is, -1 will give you the actual character's index is what it's known as. So the way a slice works is you get a beginning character, so the beginning index, which in this case would be 0, to the ending index, which would be the last character, which depends on the length of the string. And then there's a third portion here that this is the step. And so this is how you go from one to the next. And so by saying -1, we're actually saying that we want to go in reverse. So this will actually start at the end of the string and do it one at a time. So if we were just to look at enter up here, this would say go from the last one to the first one backwards. And that effectively reverses the string. So if we save this and we go and we run this again, and we just give it a test phrase, you'll see that we removed all the spaces, and then ESARHP, that's phrase backwards, and then TSET is test backwards. So we're getting pretty close. The last thing we need is one of the vitally important parts of programming, and that is what are called control flow operations, or if and else. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say if sanitized phrase is equal to sanitized phrase with this reverse operation. So the reverse of sanitized phrase. And then you'll notice we put a colon here. And that means if this is true, then we're going to do something else. So this is pretty important. We're going to say that %s is a palindrome. And then we will put this over here. And we're going to pass in phrase because we don't want to show the user the garbled version of it. And then you'll notice that there was indentation here. So there are 4 spaces right here. And that is because Python uses white space to determine the scope of whatever it is you're working on. So anything indented 4 spaces underneath this if will happen if this if is true. And then we have to back up our spaces, and we can say else with a colon again, and then anything indented 4 spaces under here will happen only if the else is supposed to be executed. So we're going to say print %s isn't that exciting, is what I would say here. And then we'll pass in the phrase again. So just go back over this. We have a comparison here from the previous episode. And when this evaluates, it'll either be true or false because it's the equal operation. This only ever yields a true or false. And if it's true, then it'll execute anything indented 4 spaces underneath of if. And we could have multiple lines in here. We could do other things. Also, it didn't just have to be a single line. And then we had to back that out. And then if this is false, it'll fall into this else statement, which handles every other situation. And so in this case, it'll be print the other phrase. So let's save this, and let's run over. Whoops, we'll get rid of this too. We don't need that anymore. Save it now. Bounce back over here. Run our script again. Say, we'll give one that's not. This is not a palindrome. Not that exciting. And then if we run it again, and we say radar, we know is a palindrome. Aha, so it worked out. So we know radar, which is a string with no spaces, that works out to being a palindrome. And so our other one was nurses run. And that's a palindrome too, because it removed the spaces and it noticed that either way was exactly the same. Just to recap what we did today, we wrote our first more involved script. That's actually the first script that we've written that did anything more than one single line. So congrats on going through that. We learned how variables work. We explored some of the extra functions and learned about our first method, replace. Learned how to reverse a string, even though it's a little weird looking. And then we also learned about control flow, so if and else. These are great building blocks for learning how to program. And we're going to be able to move quite a bit faster now that we know these things. So just keep on practicing with these and you're going to go far. I hope that this short little program kind of sparked your curiosity and you can write some scripts that take in some user input and do some things with them. Some examples that I've done in the past are like BMI calculators. So you'd ask a person for like, what is your age and what is your height and what is your weight? And remember, you can do this multiple times. So you could have an input that is like enter your name, and then you could save it off as name. And then the next line you could do input, enter your weight, and they would enter that. So there are quite a few things you can do with just a little bit we've learned right here. So go off and build some things and let me know what you're doing. I hope that you liked today's video. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what other topics you'd like to hear about in the future. And if you'd be so kind to like, share, and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it.